Hello, I'm Alex Munro, CTO and Director of Professional Services at Reliance Cyber. Innovation is really important for cybersecurity companies. If you're not constantly innovating, you're kind of moving backwards. Things change so often, it's really important. I think the key things at the moment, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention AI. So AI is a really important, really interesting kind of space. I think it's overused and over-applied. So it's used often to solve every single problem where it's not appropriate. So there is an overuse challenge that we have there. Some of the most interesting things within AI and some of the best use cases come from SOC. So where you're using machine learning, for example, to enhance automation within SOC is really important. So you're starting to see a lot of vendors pop up, lots of startups around hyper-automation. So what hyper-automation is essentially pushing decisions to machine speeds and then replacing a lot of the trudge that you do at a basic level. So improving the human efficacy of doing that testing and driving that really forwards. I think there's two elements to this. One is improving the efficacy and efficiency of services. So how good are the detections within an organisation in the context of SOC, or how efficiently can you deliver the security outcomes that you want? That's one thing. As a business and as from a business perspective, there's a cost element. So whenever you're using humans to do some of these tasks that are maybe repetitive, etc., it's a lot more cost effective and a lot more interesting for them to be focused on other things, things that are more complex and that require actual reasoning and logical kind of interactions with some of the events that are happening within a business. I think AI at the moment is what I'd describe as a nascent technology. So I think the use of AI, it requires a babysitter, so someone who's an expert in the field at the moment. So when we've looked at things like doing vulnerability discovery within code bases, for example, we found that a lot of the research points to the fact that it gets it wrong sometimes, but it's actually not so wrong that it's easily discernible by a layman. So you can't run these types of technologies on their own and expect good outcomes at the moment. You need an expert to be able to discern whether it's correct or not at the moment. So I think 5 to 10 years will be the period where it shows whether we don't have to babysit the AI and whether we can trust AI to make those decisions for us. SaaS security is something that's quite interesting currently, because a lot of services have moved to SaaS models where they offer through applications different services that are consumed by organisations. One of the challenges this presents is identity. So the identities of the different users, you get problems like credential reuse. So for example, a classic example would be something like ChatGPT or Trello, for example. It's very difficult to stop and prevent people from using the same domain credentials that they've got for the business and then logging in and sprawling across all the different SaaS applications that they have in an organisation. So I think that's one of the challenges. It's almost a shadow IT problem that's created by these types of things. I think some of the other things that are becoming more of a challenge are things like, in the more distant future, things like quantum cryptography, for example. So this would essentially be the breakdown of the ability to encrypt things successfully without them being subject to attacks. So in order to address this, there's work going on. NIST in the US, for example, have created, I think there's 4 candidate algorithms that replace them that are actually quantum safe. So there's activities going on around it to do it, but still I think organisations are going to be slow to adopt that, and when what they would term as quantum supremacy is achieved, when they're able to actually crack encryption kind of within seconds, hopefully organisations are prepared. If the past has taught us anything, it's probably highly unlikely that we are going to be prepared apart from kind of the most well-resourced organisations. Shadow IT has become a challenge again, I think. The original advent of that, I think, was where we were starting to see hotspots, so 3G, 4G hotspots. And that became a challenge where people were plugging in their laptops into hotspots and then bypassing security controls within those devices. So people started locking down USB ports and, looking at their Wi-Fi environment and reporting on that. I think we've seen the resurgence because of the reliance on SaaS and having these kind of intermediary services where there's kind of services that you may use in your personal life, but also in a work context as well, where you want to log in. And things like passwords are problematic. Passwords are still weak. People tend to select weak passwords or do silly things like reusing passwords, for example. So I think that kind of landscape and those changes is what led to this kind of resurgence and this thinking about it. I think there's organisations thinking about addressing it as well. So I think where it's probably always been there, and the threats have changed, and it's always been equally as important. However, you're starting to see more businesses around it, so you're starting to see more marketing and more people speaking up about it again, and that kind of resurgence. Really, it comes down to fundamentals. So a lot of the time people buy point solutions that are quite expensive or do solve specific individual problems, but at the same time, they won't be doing fundamentals, so things like vulnerability management. So vulnerability management is core and reliant upon having good asset management, which is a complicated problem. It's something that it just requires lots of time and attention to get right and solve, and it is very challenging, but people are still failing to get that correct, and it's a case where people are running before they can walk. So I think getting cyber hygiene and getting those fundamentals in, using outsourcing and trusted providers, third parties, in order to support you on that mission where it can be quite challenging and you don't have the budgets and the resources to do it. So I think those things combined, making sure that you use your trusted partners, rely on them, but also think about the fundamentals within your organisation and understanding that threat landscape essentially.